$9. That's what one of their ratchets cost. The same job a mechanic used to pay $200 for. Same drive size, same tooth count, same job holding a socket on a bolt at 3 in the morning under a truck. $9 against $200, and for 40 years the industry told you the $9 tool was garbage. They were right. Then they were wrong, and almost nobody noticed the exact moment it flipped. Here is the number that shouldn't exist. A company that started by selling other people's returned merchandise out of a catalog now runs more than 1,600 stores across 48 states. 1,600. That's more locations than most banks, built on tools that professional tradesmen spent 2 generations laughing at. The laughing stopped. Somewhere in the last 10 years, the guys who mock cheap tools for a living started buying them. Not the weekend crowd. The professionals. The people whose paycheck depends on the tool not breaking. That's the case I'm going to build for you. How a liquidation catalog became the biggest tool retailer in America, and the one decision, one strategic pivot that turned the punchline into a threat that Snap-on and Milwaukee now watch very carefully. Keep the word icon in your head. It matters later, and it matters more than you'd think. Start with the birth, because the birth explains everything. The year was 1977. Southern California. A father and a son named Allan and Eric Smidt started a small mail-order business. Not a factory, not an invention, a catalog. They sold liquidated and returned tools, the stuff other companies couldn't move, at prices nobody else would touch. That's the origin. No workshop, no forge, no craftsman bent over an anvil. Just 2 men who understood one thing better than their competitors. There was a customer out there who could not afford a good tool and needed a working one anyway. That customer was invisible to the tool industry in 1977. Snap-on chased the professional mechanic with the truck route and the credit account. Sears chased the middle-class homeowner with craftsmen. Nobody was serving the man who had $40, a broken car, and no choice. The Smiths served him. And the tool industry let them, because the industry didn't want that customer. There was no margin in him. There was no prestige in him. He was the guy you sold to once and never saw again. Here's where the numbers start to turn into weapons. That worthless customer, the one nobody wanted, turned out to be tens of millions of people. Every renter, every first apartment, every immigrant fixing his own car because the shop quote was a week's pay. Every farmer 3 hours from the nearest dealer. Every broke 22-year-old with a dead lawnmower. The tool industry looked at that man and saw nothing. Harbor Freight looked at that man and saw the largest untapped market in the American hardware business. One company was counting prestige, the other was counting people. The catalog worked because it broke a rule the whole industry treated as gospel. The gospel said a tool had to be good or it had to disappear. Harbor Freight said a tool had to be cheap enough that being mediocre didn't matter. If a drill costs $15 and dies in 2 years, the man who bought it doesn't feel robbed. He got what he paid for. He buys another one. That sounds cynical. It was also honest in a way the industry wasn't, because the industry was selling $200 tools to people who used them twice a year and calling it quality. Harbor Freight was selling $20 tools to people who used them twice a year and calling it a price. Now watch the machine scale. The catalog became stores. The stores went into strip malls in towns the big box chains skipped, the working towns, the border towns, the towns where a Home Depot was 40 minutes away and a Snap-on truck never came at all. They planted stores where the money was thin and the need was thick. By 1997 they were online. In 1999, Eric Smidt took sole ownership of the whole thing. And here's a detail that tells you more than any revenue chart. The company never went public. No stock offering. No outside board demanding quarterly growth. One family, one owner, one long game. Think about what that meant. Every competitor in tools answered to shareholders who wanted the number up next quarter. Harbor Freight answered to one man who could afford to wait 10 years for a plan to work. Patience is a weapon most public companies don't own. This one did. And the reputation? The reputation was terrible, and it was earned. Cheap plastic, motors that smoked, wrenches that rounded off a bolt on the second pull. The jokes wrote themselves, and every tradesman in America told them. Harbor Freight Special. Buy it for the one job. Disposable tools for a disposable weekend. I've told those jokes myself. I bought a Harbor Freight angle grinder in maybe 2006 for a fence project, fully expecting it to die, and it did, about 8 months later, in a cloud of blue smoke that smelled like burning pennies. I wasn't even mad. I paid $19. I got my fence. That was the whole deal, and both sides knew it. That deal, cheap, honest, disposable, was the entire company for 30 years. And it should have stayed that way. Most companies find a lane and die in it. The prosecution's question is simple. Why didn't this one? Here's the reframe. The junk was never the strategy. The junk was the toll you paid to get inside 1,600 buildings full of every tradesman in America. Because while the whole industry was laughing at the plastic drills, Harbor Freight was doing something the jokes hid completely. They were watching what those tradesmen actually bought. Not the toys, the serious stuff, the floor jacks, the generators, the welders, the moving blankets, and the hand trucks and the tarps that a working man goes through by the dozen. And they noticed which of their cheap tools people bought again and again. The disposable model gave them something no survey ever could, a live map, updated by the cash register, of exactly what 40 million working Americans needed and how much they'd pay for it. Every purchase was a vote. Every return was a data point. That is the mid-script revelation, and it is a business decision, not an invention. Somewhere in the 2000s and into the 2010s, Harbor Freight stopped being a liquidation catalog and became a manufacturer's brain wearing a discount store's face. They started designing their own tools, not buying leftovers, building lines, tier by tier, aimed at customers they now understood better than the customers understood themselves. If that surprised you, if you always thought Harbor Freight just resold whatever fell off a container ship, this is the part worth a like on this video. It tells the algorithm to push more of the real story instead of the myth. The myth is the easy version. This is the one that's actually true. Look at the tiers, because the tiers are the whole verdict. Pittsburgh for hand tools, Central Machinery for the shop equipment, Chicago Electric and Warrior for the cheap power tools that kept the old reputation alive on purpose, Predator for engines. Then, climbing the ladder, Bauer, then Hercules, close enough to professional cordless that guys started arguing about it online. And at the top, Icon. Icon is the name I told you to remember. Icon is the pivot. This is a line of mechanics hand tools Harbor Freight aimed directly at the $200 ratchet, the Snap-on, the Mac, the tools sold off a truck to men who go into real debt to own them. Harbor Freight's own marketing does something no discount brand ever dared. It names Snap-on directly and puts its ratchets in head-to-head comparison testing against it. Read that again. A company built on the reputation of junk now stands in the ring and points at the king of the trade and says, "Measure us against him." That is not a discount store move. That is a declaration of war, and it was fought with the exact reputation everyone thought was a weakness. Ask any working mechanic under 40 about Icon versus Snap-on, and you will start an argument that does not end. One guy swears the Icon ratchet is identical steel at a fifth of the price. The next guy swears you can feel the difference on a stuck bolt at 5 a.m. And the difference is your knuckles. Both of them have owned both tools, neither will back down. That fight is happening in comment sections and toolboxes across the country right now. Here's why that fight matters, and it's not about ratchets, it's about the man holding them. For 100 years, the professional tool trade ran on a brutal deal. To be taken seriously, you had to go into debt. A young mechanic starting out could owe more on his toolbox than on his car. Thousands of dollars financed off a truck at rates that would embarrass a credit card before he'd earned a paycheck. That debt was the price of the trade. It was how you proved you belonged. And Harbor Freight walked straight into that 100-year arrangement and put a working ratchet on the shelf for a fraction of the price. No truck, no credit account, no interest. For a lot of young tradesmen, that wasn't a shopping choice. That was the difference between starting the career and not. Now watch the cascade, because this is where the stakes stop being about one company. When the cheap option gets good enough, the whole pricing structure of a 200-year-old trade starts to crack. The Snap-on dealer used to have a monopoly on Sirius. He doesn't anymore. The apprentice, who used to have no option but debt, now has one on a shelf in a strip mall. The old guard hates this, and I understand why. There's real craft in the top-tier tools, real warranty service, real steel. A Snap-on lasts a career and gets handed down. But it lasts a career as a hard sell to a 22-year-old who can't make rent. And Harbor Freight knew that the same way they knew it in 1977, by counting people instead of prestige. Here's the part that should stop you cold. This entire empire is still private. Still one family. Still, by every account, controlled by Eric Smidt, who took full ownership in 1999 and never sold a share to Wall Street. The exact revenue is hard to pin down for a company that keeps its books closed, but the public estimates put it well into the billions a year, the kind of number that would make it a major public corporation if it wanted to be. It doesn't want to be. Sit with that for a second, because it's the quiet human core of this whole thing. A father and a son with a catalogue of other people's returns in 1977. The father is gone. The son built it into more than 1,600 stores and, by the company's own count, over 70 million customers. And he never once had to explain himself to a shareholder or a board. Whatever you think of the tools, that is one of the most patient business stories in American retail, and almost nobody outside the trade knows the man's name. The people it changed are the part the numbers can't hold. The immigrant who fixed his own transmission in a driveway in 1985 because the shop wanted a month's rent. The kid in a rural county who started a mobile welding business with a Harbor Freight machine because he couldn't finance a name brand one. The retiree on a fixed income who can still afford to keep his own house standing. This company was built out of the customers everyone else threw away, and it never forgot who they were. That's the story the history books skip, because business history loves inventors and hates retailers. If this channel is doing something for you, if you're the kind of person who'd rather know how the money actually moved than hear another myth, the subscribe button is right there. We're building a record of how American industry really works, one case at a time. Let me be honest about what's still contested, because a real case admits its weak points. Whether Icon truly matches Snap-on is not settled, and the guys who test tools to destruction on camera don't fully agree. Some torture tests show the top-tier steel pulling ahead under extreme load. Others show the gap is a rounding error for anything a normal mechanic will ever do. Depending on who you ask, Harbor Freight either caught the king or just got close enough to scare him. Probably the second. But close enough to scare him was unthinkable 10 years ago. And the reputation problem hasn't vanished. Either the cheap tiers are still cheap, still built to a price, still occasionally still smoking on the workbench 8 months in. The company didn't abandon the junk. It kept the junk on purpose at the bottom as the front door and built the good stuff on the floor above it. That's not an accident. That's the most disciplined thing about the whole operation. Which brings the case to its verdict. Harbor Freight didn't get respectable by pretending it was always good. It got respectable by being cheap for 30 years, learning exactly what 40 million working Americans needed, while everyone laughed, and then, quietly, deliberately, building tools those same people would trust with their livelihood. If there's a Harbor Freight tool in your garage right now, go look at it, not the price. The tier. If it says Pittsburgh or Chicago Electric, you're holding the old company, the toll, the front door, the punchline.
If it says Icon or Hercules, you're holding the new one, the one that scared an industry. Same store, same family, same 40-year plan finally paying off. $9 for a ratchet. That's where this started, and for 40 years it was proof the tool was junk. Now it's proof of something else entirely, that the customer the whole industry threw away in 1977 turned out to be the one who mattered most. The professionals aren't laughing anymore, they're checking out. And the man who built it never had to explain himself to anyone. If any of this changed how you look at that store the next time you drive past one, that's the whole reason we do this. No clickbait, just the case, laid out fact by fact. Subscribe and stay for the next one. There are more of these coming, and the next company on the stand won't see it either.